GoPro. It's not only a catchy name, it has been one of the most dramatic rise and fall cases in business over the past couple of decades. The first ever GoPro Hero was introduced to the public at a San Diego trade show in September of 2004. That is where the first official sale occurred. It was an order of just 100 units from a Japanese distributor, and so much has happened since then. I think most of us know that GoPro went on to essentially define the category of action cameras. For anyone looking to film themselves surfing or snowboarding or racing, anything along those lines, it quickly became the most popular and most practical option. They're small, lightweight, durable, have all the appropriate accessories for whatever you might need it for. I mean, action cameras have become synonymous with GoPros. Even if the camera happens to be made by a different company, all of us still call it a GoPro in the same way you might call a tissue a Kleenex, even if it's made by Puffs. That is probably about the highest status you could reasonably hope for within a specific market, which is why you might be surprised to hear that the GoPro company has been struggling for some time now. I can remember reading comments requesting I make this video going all the way back to when I first started this channel over 7 years ago. The peak of the company, when it was at its absolute highest, was around 2014 to 2015, depending on how you want to measure it. I could show you a variety of visuals that show a noticeable decline, but for right now, to keep it simple, there is one measure that I think demonstrates it more clearly than any other, and that would be the stock price. In June of 2014, GoPro had a successful initial public offering where shares of it were being sold to the public for the first time. A few months later, in September, the company hit its peak valuation at over $11 billion. I think it's interesting, that happened exactly 10 years after selling those first 100 cameras. That's pretty wild, right? To go from almost nothing to an $11 billion valuation over the course of a decade? Come on now, that's averaging over $1 billion a year. Well, over the next decade, that $11 billion has been reduced all the way down to about $200 million. Yeah, it has lost over 98% of its value, meaning if you had invested $100 in GoPro at the worst possible time 10 years ago, you would have less than $2 of it remaining. Clearly, a lot has happened here, so in this video, I'm going to do my best to explain the rise and fall of GoPro. The main person behind the company through all of it has been Nick Woodman. He essentially invented the GoPro camera, founded the company around it, and to this day is still the CEO of it. See, shortly after graduating college in the late 1990s, he aspired to start his own business. His first attempt was a website called EmpowerAll.com where he sold electronics, but it failed to gain traction and was ultimately shut down. His second attempt was an online gaming service where he was able to raise almost $4 million from outside investors, but that happened to be during the big dot-com bubble, so as soon as that burst, the business was shut down and all of those investors lost their money. That one was understandably a very discouraging experience for him, so much so that he left the country for 5 months to take this big surfing vacation in Australia. That is such a big part of this. You have to understand that Nick Woodman has always been an avid surfer. In fact, proximity to the ocean and the waves was a big factor in his decision to go to college in San Diego. So you know he was a big fan if he was basing his college decisions on it. And I have to recognize that this is a prime example of someone turning their passion into a career. At that time, it was almost impossible to get a decent picture of yourself surfing. It was almost like a joke among surfers that only professionals would get nice photos taken because they were the ones with dedicated photographers following them around. The best that an amateur could do was get one of those disposable cameras from Kodak and do their best to try to strap it onto their wrist somehow. And that right there was Woodman's initial idea. He wanted to engineer a special strap that surfers could use to attach their cameras up against their wrist in a way that they wouldn't detach easily or be swinging everywhere like most of the existing homemade ones. But then he also wanted the camera to be lightweight and inside a durable case, so the idea evolved from there. You can see where the name came from, right? It's like you were going pro by getting such a great photo taken of yourself. When he returned home from his trip, I have to respect the fact that he spent almost 2 years turning the idea into a reality. He says that his previous business failure had scared him so much that he used that fear of failure as motivation to work extra hard to ensure that it would not happen again. So he moved back in with his parents and started working on it 7 days a week for 20 hours a day. That previous experience had also made him hesitant to take on any outside investors, considering he had lost $4 million of other people's money before. So for the first few years, the company was completely funded by his own personal savings combined with loans from his parents. He was like a one-man operation, functioning as designer, engineer, salesman, and everything else. That first GoPro utilized a modified 35mm camera from an unknown Chinese manufacturer just because it was cheaper, that he dropped 2 years later when GoPro introduced their first digital camera. It was only able to capture 10 seconds of video at a time, but it was improved with a new release the following year, and of course there were further improvements with each new release. Woodman would call surf shops trying to get them to carry his camera, he would go to trade shows regularly, and even appeared on QVC, the shopping channel, multiple times to try and sell it through the television. It was a big break when the outdoors company REI agreed to put it on their shelves, and an even bigger break when Best Buy agreed to do it. In 2012, Woodman sold 8.88% of the company for $200 million, valuing it at $2.25 billion and officially making him a billionaire at the age of 37. It was one of the fastest growing companies out there, with sales of over $1 billion by 2014, and profits growing higher every year. I do want to point out that sales continued to grow, hitting a peak in 2015, but profits had already started to fall before quickly turning into losses. Clearly, this is not the trajectory that GoPro was hoping for, and I have 3 reasons that I believe help explain what has been happening. First off, everything started becoming much more inefficient. Once that IPO happened, I swear everyone was oozing with confidence when it came to GoPro.
Founder Nick Woodman there to launch the biggest consumer electronics IPO in more than a decade.
It was such a fast-growing company, exceeding expectations at almost anything that they had tried up until that point. Some speculation here, but I'm thinking that a lot of the investors and leadership within the company started feeling like the sky was the limit and they could not fail. In the words of Nick Woodman, we went from being thrifty and scrappy and efficient and wildly innovative to being bloated and what's the opposite of thrifty. Within a year and a half of that IPO, they more than doubled their workforce to 1,600 employees that has since been followed by multiple rounds of layoffs. They probably got bigger than they should have there. It seems like every year there's a big news story saying that GoPro is making significant cuts, and that's not what you want to see. In 2015, Nick Woodman received this $285 million stock package that evidently made him the highest paid CEO in the country. That does not sound very efficient, but then just a few years later, it was reported that his salary was scaled all the way back to $1. So these are wild extremes. Going back to my list, and I ordered these in a way where they become more impactful as I go, so inefficiency was likely a part of it, but an even bigger part of it would be their failed efforts. I know that's a little broad, but GoPro has wasted a fair amount of resources trying to become something more than just a camera company, but let's face it, they have not made any significant progress in doing it. I think anybody watching this would likely still identify GoPro as a camera company, and probably would have trouble identifying anything else that they even associate with them. At one point, they were trying to become heavily involved with entertainment. Truly, there are a ton of popular videos on YouTube and other social media that have been shot with GoPros. It was a big part of their initial success, and maybe even the first time you learned about them, so it seemed logical enough to utilize their following and invest in original content. They hired the former head of Hulu Originals and an HBO sports executive, developed a bunch of TV series, but none of it seemed to be very profitable or promising, so they gave up on it and shut down the entire division in 2016. Another failed effort for GoPro was making drones. Again, it was meant to be a logical way for them to break out as more than just a camera company, but ultimately ended up being an embarrassing waste of time and money. In short, they made a drone called Karma that was highly anticipated and delayed multiple times before finally being sold in October of 2016. However, only a few weeks after it came out, it was completely recalled. I guess they didn't test it properly, it had power issues for some people where they were shutting off mid-flight and dropping out of the sky. All 2,500 units were recalled, and it wasn't relaunched until after the holiday season. You can see the issue with that. And then after another holiday season, it was clear that the Karma drone was not that big new product that they were hoping for, and it was discontinued. For the final reason on my list, I'm going to go with something that is fairly straightforward, but GoPro suffers from a narrow market. I want to be clear that there are, of course, various reasons someone might be able to actually utilize a GoPro, but for the most part, they are best used to record action sports. It was created to fill that exact need, and over the years, it has proven that it can do it. But for most of us, for most other purposes, we're probably likely to use our smartphone. Remember, GoPro predates the iPhone, so during the course of its existence, it has been competing with it and not exactly winning. In 2016, when everything was falling apart, Nick Woodman said he felt a big mistake of theirs was failing to align GoPro with the smartphone movement. I guess sort of saying that they should have been working with smartphones instead of competing against them. The bottom line here is that GoPro is stuck in the narrow market of action cameras. It's a fine market, but where else can they go with it? That is where you have to stop and ask if a company who mainly makes those cameras can possibly be worth $11 billion. I think investors have lost confidence in GoPro's ability to build upon their original concept and expand into something else. And I hate to pile on even further and say this, but even when you look specifically at those cameras, they're not as dominant as they once were. Anybody that has looked into buying one of them over the past few years has likely seen attractive alternatives, some at lower prices, so even when it comes to what they do best, they have lost some traction. Sales have fluctuated a bit, but have never come close to their previous highs, and without any major changes, it seems unlikely to happen again anytime soon. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about the rise and fall of GoPro? To me, it really seems like the company had so much momentum and promise that maybe people got a little bit carried away. In reality, it probably should not have been an $11 billion company, but at the same time, did it really deserve to lose so much of its value? I'm curious to hear what you think about that. And also, do you own a GoPro? What do you think of it, and what do you use it for? Is it one of the more obvious purposes, or maybe you found a cool use for it that most people would not even think of? And finally, what do you think about Nick Woodman and the company that he created? I imagine there might be some polarizing opinions there. And any other thoughts you have about GoPro, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.